Father, thank you that you know where we're at and what's going on. And that through history you've spoken to your people right at their point of need. And I ask that you would speak through me. And give us what we need to know. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. We're going to follow the kids' church curriculum for the next 15 minutes, which is the story of the death and the resurrection of Lazarus. And I'm going to tie together, there's a wider story around this in the Gospel of John, which is an account of Jesus' life and works. And it's a wider story around it, which often isn't told because there's a random story in the middle. And because of the way that the Bible was put together in the Middle Ages with verses and chapters and headings which weren't there in the original Greek, we often miss an incredible connection between two well-known stories that are really part of the same story. So I'm reading from John chapter 11. John chapter 11. And the background here is that, if you have a Bible, you're welcome to read it. If you want to listen, if you're dyslexic like me and reading is hard, just listen in, it's totally fine. John chapter 11. The background is Jesus has some friends, the brothers and sisters, Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. And these three siblings come up a number of times in the story of the life of Jesus. There's a lot of back and forth between them, a bit of power play. There's a controversial story about each of them. And I like that. This is a family with drama. I come from a family with drama. I can identify with this family of drama. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And the story goes like this. It says, now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from a village called Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. That's the first clue that these stories are connected. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. Jesus loved Lazarus. I don't know what their friendship looked like. We see hardly any of it here in the beginning of these stories of the Gospel of John. But they were close enough that Jesus loved Lazarus. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. I don't know what their relationship was like, or all of the time that they'd spent together, though we see snippets of it throughout the Gospels. But whatever they'd done and been through together, we know that Jesus loved Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus. Yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews tried to kill you there by stoning, and yet you're going back there? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by the world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Then Thomas, called the twin, said to the rest of the disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live, even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world." After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and said, "The teacher is here and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. And Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place outside where Martha met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to mourn Lazarus. But when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" Jesus asked. "Come and see," they said. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor. He has been there for 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Skipping a story onto the next one, chapter 12. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived at Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus has raised from the dead. Clue that the stories are linked. Here, a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. You can guess why, right? Martha served. We've been there before, haven't we? While Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with Jesus. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, which is an expensive perfume, and she poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. One of Jesus' disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, spoiler alert, objected, "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It's worth a year's wages." And the background here is that nard is a burial perfume. You would save it up like you would get together your pension over your years, or your funeral plan, so that when you died, your loved ones didn't have to pick up the financial pieces. It was worth a lot. Judas did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief.
Yes.
And he used to help himself to the money bag. Jesus replied, "Leave her alone. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you. That's a reference which goes on to say, therefore be open-handed. But you will not always have me. I want to draw a few connecting lines. Jesus loved Lazarus. Jesus loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus. It seems like they also deeply loved him. Jesus hates death. He wept. Shortest verse in the Bible, John 11:35. Jesus wept. When Jesus gets to the tomb and he begins to call Lazarus out, and Martha's like, "What are you doing? It stinks in there." I'm going to raise a question here. Mary had a load of burial perfume. Lazarus shouldn't have stunk because they should have embalmed him. That's why they dress it. You know the story of the resurrection? The women go down to the tomb to dress Jesus in the spices and the herbs so that he doesn't stink. A few days later, dinner, Lazarus alive, Martha, burial perfume, Jesus' feet, uproar. Jesus says, she has saved this perfume for the day of my burial. Why didn't Martha and Mary use their burial perfume on Lazarus? Lord, if you were here, our brother would not have died. Even with him in the tomb, with him on his way, was there still like the smallest glimmer of hope, even as they were dressing him with the cloth and putting him into the tomb? Was there still not the tiniest glimmer of hope that Jesus might show? That even if Jesus could not make well this sick man, maybe he could raise this dead man. And so they didn't use the perfume on him. And sure, he smelled bad when he came out, but he was alive. There's something that happens a few times through this story, which is they fall at Jesus' feet. In their aching, in their grief, when Lazarus is still in the tomb, they run to Jesus and fall at his feet. And then even once he's raised, at the dinner, Mary again is down at Jesus' feet. Other versions of this story say that the perfume mixed with her tears. Probably still processing the grief and the surprise joy. The glimmer of hope that they had, which did not turn out quite how they wanted, though they did get more than they bargained for, and in doing so, an incredible understanding that Jesus doesn't just raise people from the dead, but he is the resurrection and the life. Lazarus would have died again, right? What then? I am the resurrection and the life. So if the perfume was a sign of Mary and Martha's hope that God would pull through in the way they wanted to, and for sure they were grieving, and disappointed and traumatized. And yet the way they met God in their grief and their trauma led them to pour this burial perfume onto Jesus instead. Why? Because Jesus began to give them this understanding that as God himself, he was not separate from our pain or suffering. He was not above our death. In fact, his purpose was to die for us, to enter into what it is to be human. Someone old and famous once said, "I think, therefore I am." I would say it's more true to say, "I suffer, therefore I am." It's an inescapable part of human existence, and yet it's one that God knows. And as we look at Jesus' face and we see in him a God who knows and cares and is with, who will bring about a new creation. He says, where there is no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. You and I are invited to pour our grief onto the feet of Jesus. Whether it's grief for loved ones lost years ago, whether it's grief for John, whether it's grief for relationships and marriages lost and broken down, grief over the hopes and dreams that you never realized, grief over the life you thought you would live and haven't, we are invited to weep our tears of grief onto the feet of Jesus. And to see what happens. Jesus, you love us. And as we experience your resurrection in our everyday life in loads of ways, we also look to you as the resurrection and the life for our future, for our life in the new creation, to the one who holds us. Thank you, Jesus.